So today, when you opened the news in the morning, you could see the big titles, how the elections that happened yesterday and the day before finally happened. What were the results? So again, in Czech Republic, we went through this ritual of regular elections. So people went to vote. And when we will talk about parallel polis, I think it's interesting to stop at this point, because Czech meaning of the term to vote means hlasovat, or dát hlas, to give a vote, has very interesting etymology. Because when you strictly translate the term hlas, it's not a vote, it's a voice. So when you vote in Czech, it means you give a voice. When you give a voice, you give up your own voice, you hand it over to someone else, and he got the voice, and he can tell you, shut up, I have the voice now. So what we are going to talk about is different way, different attitude you can take other than giving up your voice. Not to give up your voice, not to vote for, usually we say, smaller evil, but there is possibly another way. But we are here to talk about the concept parallel polis and where it comes from. And I have to say a little story behind. Most of you probably heard about it, but for those who didn't, this space was originally inspired by a Slovak hackerspace, Progress Bar. And Progress Bar was a little bit different hackerspace than others, because it was not primarily a geek club where you just bustled and worked with technologies and so on, but they were very much focused on lectures and education and gatherings, which we liked a lot, that they didn't only close up to small community, but they also promoted. They also promoted some new technologies, crypto technologies, and so on. So we wanted to have something similar in Prague. And we were searching for a format, a space, some venue for it, and of course, a name. And when we have found this house, we realized that we can be something more, something wider than just a hackerspace. It can create a space that will serve to public to get simply knowledge, ideas, inspiration, whatever else. And then one evening, when we were setting up this premise and we were preparing the first Hackers Congress six years ago, I talked to my friend who studied political sciences. And I was describing him what we aim to do here. I taught him about Bitcoin and liberating technologies and encryption and creating some unique, special and separate sphere of relationships beside the state, an official one. And he told me, the thing you're talking about, Václav Benda called parallel polis. It's the same thing you want to do. I said, okay, I've never heard about it, but I will write it down because it sounds really cool. So we started to, we took this word, these two words, and we started to study what's behind. And we realized that we know all the context, but this small word, the particular phrase, parallel polis, remained just in some texts from the past, from communist regime, from 70s, as you will see. And it remained partially forgotten. So parallel polis, until 2014, wasn't some hyped word that everybody knows, but exactly the opposite. Like only a few historians and few political scientists knew the term parallel polis. So we decided to take it up and give it a new life. As we were diving into the term, it was interesting and important to understand where the term comes from. And especially for those of you who are not into Mid-Europe history, it's very important to understand at least the very basics, how the environment and the era where the parallel polis comes from looked like and how it developed. So we are in deep 70s when we talk about parallel polis, and at this time you can see it was deep communism here, which started in 1948 with very brutal change, which was very, very unexpected, and it was a big lesson because after the Second World War, everybody thought that these animal stuff and terror and brutals that happened during the Second World War will not happen again. And 48 and 49, and it was here again, and in a very, very sharp way. The communists achieved during 1 or 2 years to spread the fear and orders so effectively that they simply smashed all opposition or other voices and established really tough totalitarian regime. Then in 58, you probably know about Khrushchev and his critics of Stalinism and so on. So the situation stabilized a little bit, and the environment became a little bit more liberal and breathable. Then a very important part was the Prague Spring, 67 and 68, which was an era of very high level of liberty and very optimistic social atmosphere, when especially art, literature, but also many other professions could suddenly express themselves much freer than it was used before. And to this situation, without any warning, in 68 there was this direct invasion of USSR armies, you probably know about, which was like a punch from the Soviet Union that nobody expected. And to this peaceful and liberal environment suddenly came the Soviet tanks and started to shut to public buildings like National Museum and so on. So for the witnesses, as I was interviewing during my program, Polis 100, that was exactly about this era, they told me that they were totally shocked by what was happening, even though they already had the experience of the communist regime before. Then from the 1968 and 80s, after the occupation, there came so-called normalization. It was a very tough wave of totalitarian practices, which we'll be going to talk about. And in 80s, there started some stagnation. The regime started to be more in defense than in offense, and the structure started to simply disintegrate and so on. So when we talk about parallel polis and when it happened, so we talk about this era, these 70s, after the USSR army occupation. So we call this era normalization. So what happened? In 68, the tanks came, the armies, and after that there were a couple of individual acts of protest. One of the most famous is self-burning of Jan Palach and his followers, which was a very strong act of protest, but the regime succeeded in spreading fear and simply discouraged the opposition to act somehow in a unified way and in some structured way. So only very few individual activities of some protest, dissent, and so on remained. One of them was so-called, and one of the most powerful in Czechoslovakia was so-called second culture, which was represented mostly by folk, underground, and other musicians. And then some theaters and so on. You probably know the story of Václav Havel, etc. So you can see. Then lots of intellectual elites were fired from universities and Scientological workplaces and so on, and they lost their job and had to find something else to do. Usually, it was some workers. Like second-class kind of the work, like manual work and so on. And the only way they could continue their work was to go to underground. So they started to create so-called apartment universities and small groups where they continued with teaching and doing publication activities and so on. What's also interesting is that very important role played the Christians groups and churches, which is not frequently mentioned. And then in 1977, the one of the most significant acts of resistance was so-called Charter 77, which was a part or some result of growing influence of different small movements and individuals who started to be more and more discomfort, but also encouraged due to the regime practices. So what is interesting and important also is to see that the Czechoslovak context is very different from other Soviet countries, even in the European bloc. So when you search for other dissident movements in other countries, you see very different strategies that have been taken. One of the most powerful dissident movement was established in Poland. Where in 80s Lech Walesa and his fellows kind of hacked the system in a very interesting way. Because what they did was not any unofficial movement, but they found in the constitution that workers have a right to create unions of workers. And these unions have a right to partial independence and sovereignty and self-governance. So they claimed these rights, and as they were workers' movement, which was the basic vehicle for socialism, they kind of hacked the system because they achieved that the government and the Kurds had to admit that they have this right and they have this sovereignty and they can continue to work. And in 1981, they already had 10 million subscribers, because as it was workers' union, they could suddenly spread around Poland in many different cities and whatever kind of organizations that had more workers, and that's why they were in a mass way very, very successful and very influential. In Hungary, when I take another example, the opposition or the protest movement were more like relevant political opposition. They were more like reformists who wanted to discuss with the system and push to change the system. So it was more like political way of changing things. Another example is Slovakia, where the dissident movements were very small, like in comparison, especially to Poland, but even with Czech Republic. But they had different nature. For example, environmental protecting groups or churches or individuals who operated in different spots in Slovakia. So we have to understand that the context of these parallel policies, if we use a very wide term, differed country to country and culture to culture, let's say. But now we are going to talk about Charter 77 because there is a direct link between the term parallel polis and Charter 77 that I will explain to you. So what was Charter 77? It was basically a petition of so-called civil society that just wanted and appeal to government to keep the rules that they accepted via international treaties that contain norms related to human rights. It was signed in Helsinki in 70s, but immediately the regime started to interrupt and not to keep the rules. So Charter 77 was an appeal that wanted to be legal and direct dialogue with the government, and appealed to comply with the human rights rules. Here you can see some quotes. So you see the narrative and examples of the text. So it was really like from our perspective, it was nothing very aggressive, because they just asked to keep the rules the state already accepted. But in this time, it was really very brave act, which the regime took really bad. How the Charter 77 worked? So it was a text elaborated by a collective of authors that wanted to remain anonymous, but one of them were Václav Havel, also Václav Benda, and others, other important names of the Czech dissident movement. They insist on remaining unpolitical in terms that Charter 77 unified different professions, different political thinking, different currents of thought, and so on. So they wanted to unify all the streams of protests and opposition movements together. They didn't achieve that much mass influence. Finally, it had like 1,200 signers until the end of communism. So it remained a very small initiative. But the reaction of the regime shows that it was like a hit to the black middle point, because the regime reacted really in a strong way. So all the protagonists afterwards were quite brutally chased and interrogated and still under surveillance, criminalized. Lots of them remained or ended up in jail finally. So what was the reaction? Václav Benda describes the ways of reaction in a small article from 1968, where he summarized up a very interesting point, and it was that the regime had set of strategies that they repeatedly changed. They still use the same. They only changed it. This time we are gonna create some anti-campaign. One of the examples is so-called anti-charter, which was a text that was refusing the Charter 77 requirements and appeals. And they asked all the Czechoslovak elite, especially artists and teachers, from professors and so on, to sign it. So they've created a very strong media pressure based on defamation. You could read that the Charter 77's representants were like junkies who took drugs and poisoned wells and were funded by imperialists from US and so on and so on. So really like so if we talk about fake news today, it was nothing in comparison to fake news generated by the communist regime at this time. Another way was bureaucratic persecution. So whatever you wanted to do and you needed some approval for it, you didn't get it. You couldn't travel, you couldn't study, you couldn't whatever. You were still in some clash with administration. Another way was police repression. So everybody from the movement knew that they have their own police officer. They knew that the power tries to persuade other people to cooperate with them and become agents. So they knew that there probably are infiltrated agents among them, and they were totally without any reasoning suddenly arrested, interrogated for a couple of hours, and then they let them go. And they did it repeatedly all the time. So you never knew if you come back home or not any day. Another way was that they created criminal trials, usually from constructed reasons and background, and then they imprisoned the actors based on these constructed accusations. And in general, they spread fear and intimidation. So this was how they reacted. And now we are gonna come to the parallel polis term, where it comes from. So the author of the term is Václav Benda, who was a politician. He lived here in Prague. I sat at the table where the Charter 77 was written. His wife is Kamila Bendová is still alive, so we interviewed her a couple of times, and it was really interesting to see, because at their family table, a very big part of Czech history happened, and one of them was the Charter 77 was written there. So he was kind of a key person in the movement. He was mathematician and philosopher, and all his interests can be covered with this triangle, if you use the parallel polis symbolics, which was Catholicism, politics, and philosophy. So these were three top topics of Václav Benda, which tells you that he was a deeply believing Catholic who always imprinted his Christianity to his texts, to his philosophy, and so on. What Benda openly was also he wanted to be the kind of a leader of the movement. He also hoped that if the regime fails one day, which he really believed in, and there were not many people who really believed that the regime will fail, but he was one of them, and he hoped that he will be the Václav, but not the Havel, who finally became the political leader. But he wanted to be the Václav Havel, which he finally didn't become. And one of the reasons probably is that in country where is the highest rate of non-believers and atheists, it's quite difficult to become a leader with a Catholic program. So now, how it happened? Václav Benda in 1978 started to realize that behind Charter 77 movement, there are some patterns of the behavior of the movement that show us some interesting phenomena. And the phenomena is that as an act of self-protection and survival in the environment of the oppression, they had to start to behave in a different way and take different tactics. And Václav Benda was describing the tactics, the strategies, and he covered those strategies with the name of parallel polis. So what is parallel polis, according to Benda, is a set of strategies that the movement took to protect against the totality and to create an environment that is not in direct clash with the government, but creates its own social structures that work beside the official one. And it's also interesting to see the two words, to take a look at them. So first, polis. What does it mean? Because very frequently people think like, is it police like the state police? So you're joking of it, or what? No, it's a polis in the old Greek term that refers to ancient polis, so-called city-state. Is the most frequent term you realized, but of course the polis also developed. It appeared around 800 before Christ. As the population of Greece grew, so there started to appear more and more polis, these city-states, which created some basic organizational structure of the society. So polis is basically basic social structure. We might say also community. So the basic unit of the society. What is also important there is the personal identification with the polis. So I am the part of the polis, where in the Greek times originally there were tribes, but what happened was that with the rise of polis, the tribe system was changed into the identification with the polis more than with the tribes. And what was the primary visible character of polis was that every polis had its own army, its own laws, and its own set of gods. Then the word parallel is also interesting to take a look at the etymology, because very frequently people think that it's something alternative, something derived from the main thing. So we take the official main thing and we just create some fork of it or so. But parallel doesn't mean alternative. It means it's also from Greek. Is a para means alongside something out of, I would say. And aleos is one another. So we see the total differentiate of the subjects. So it's always something totally separate. It's also interesting to see other definitions of parallel, which is never meeting, however far extended, but have the same direction. So this is the term parallel polis. And when we come back to Václav Benda, so what were the main pillars or the principles of parallel polis according to Václav Benda? So basically what it is creating of autonomous social and other structures that are independent and work beside the official regime or other authorities. He also named some parts of, or some pillars of the parallel police that were characteristic for the Charter 77 movement. One of the most important were the parallel education, then of course parallel economy, parallel culture, the second culture. Then it was the principle of active civil rights protection. They had their own information system called samizdat, which was like organically, or we could say peer-to-peer spreading of publications and other information. And they claimed to have sovereign international relationships, also foreign policy, we might say. So these were those that were characteristic for Charter 77. But what is important, and Benda expressly says it in the essay, is that these are only some examples, and there is not any limit or some rule why parallel police couldn't do many other things and operate on other fields. So it's always depends on the circumstances, environment, era, culture, and so on. What the parallel police in this exact condition is. As if you remember the examples from other countries, so the parallel police in Hungary was totally different to parallel police in Czechoslovakia, was totally different to parallel police in Poland. Sorry. And later, as the term was discussed within the dissident movement, the other authors like Václav Havel, Šimečka, and others elaborated some idea what is the goal of parallel police, because otherwise it was just a description of strategy, like for example crypto-anarchy is. But they articulated the goal of parallel police, which is independent society. And it sounds very general. So what does it mean? And I love the most the Václav Havel definition, which is very idealistic, but it says that independent society means that wherever the civil society can organize itself, the state should make the step back. Like, okay, you are able to organize by yourself. I give up my rules and my authority and leave it up to you. So the ideal state, co-living with parallel police, would always make the step back when the self-organization is able to govern our own things without the state authority. So now maybe it's a good question to ask, so what can be parallel police? Is it only the house in Holešovice or in Vienna or in Bratislava as it used to be? Or what all can be parallel police? And not a long time ago, we had a very interesting interview with Maglar and Frank Brown on their podcast with Stream Cypherpunk. And we discussed there that parallel police probably is just some expression of something that is deeply in our human gene, in our human nature, because when we apply the principles of parallel police back to the historical facts, we can see that in history many times, whenever the state power grew too much, there were created some kind of parallel structures. And that's why I placed here this image that I really like. It's an image from the ancient Rome. This up on the ground is the Rome Empire and the governance by the Rome Empire. And here under the ground are the catacombs that you can visit, especially in Rome, which were occupied by the first Christians after after the BC, simply. As you probably remember from history, the first Christians during the first 3 centuries after Christ were illegal and chased and haunted by the Rome imperial power. So they had to operate totally illegally. And their strategy was that they dig into the ground and created truly underground cities, or catacombs, it's called. So even back in history, 2,000 years ago, we can see some expressions of need, in this case, to freely express my religious preferences. And it can, of course, also be something that will happen in future. I chose an example of Parallel Polis 3.0, which is a concept described by Juraj Bednar, who is having parallel talk right now. And I recommend to read it if you haven't. It's on the website of Slovak Parallel Polis, paralelnapolis.sk. And it's an idea how a Parallel Polis concept could develop for future, not to be dependent on physical space, physical premises. So he proposes kind of a fluid structure, which anyway is happening as other Parallel Polis and in different forms are growing, not only in Czech Republic. So this is some final thought that I would like to propose, and I would like you to think about and learn from history, because maybe some form of Parallel Polis is some kind of anthropological constant, something that is common for all humans, all human beings. And we can see throughout history that some forms of Parallel Polis happen, and we can learn from the strategies. We can see even now in the world, when we take a look to different regimes, that things are happening there. When you take a look to North Korea, you can see that there are youth smuggling into this North Korea culture, especially from South Korea, but from other countries as well. And even though the regime did really, really good job in brainwashing the people, they didn't succeed. Some basic need for freedom remained even in this North Korean regime, and some versions of Parallel Polis we probably don't know about now are happening there as well. So it's my call to study history and search for Parallel Policies and the principles and the inspiration for this. So I would like to end up with this, with what I've started with, and it's the moment when I was talking to my friend about crypto technologies, Bitcoin, decentralization, and so on, and he, as political scientist, realized the connection, some relation to the historical point from 70s to Parallel Polis, to the concept, and he proposed that. And for me, this is a very interesting moment, because it connects some very small piece of our history with something that is happening now, and which was the very grain and seed of this concept we are participating on now. So thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much. Do we have any questions? Raise your hand, please.
Could you please tell a bit more about the future, the visions for Parallel Polis?
That's a very good question. because recently Parallel Polis is going through very dramatic changes. You probably saw that Slovak Parallel Polis has closed down. It was not feasible to keep the premise they found. Bratislava, Slovakia. There was Parallel Polis for 2 years or 3 years. Another Parallel Polis was established last year in Vienna, operates totally independently in a very nice way. And there are other groups, like in Košice and in many other places, that somehow want to deal with this, what we've done here, and continue with it and follow it up. But even this project, this like first polis, I would call it, goes through changes, which are organizational, which are related, of course, to need to create different business model for operations of such a big house. And there is also this concept of Parallel Polis 3.0, like a new version that wouldn't be that much bind to physical premises, to some like institution in the physical way, but could provide us some tools to cooperate and work together in another way, which I think is very important for future, because what is happening in the world now, and it's the topic of this Congress, is that accidentally the situation can get much worse, and even keeping the physical space might be too big obstacle due to some oppression, repression, whatever, from the side of the state. And we have to be ready for a moment when we won't be able to operate a physical space. Charter 77 also didn't have their own coffee and co-working and so on, because it wouldn't be possible, simply. And we have to get ready for a moment when it won't be possible to operate in this nice way anymore. And I think the concept Parallel Polis 3.0 is exactly the way, the direction that is interesting to talk about.
Have you thought about trying to reach some billionaire, like some billionaire?
Billionaire?
Yeah, like Peter Thiel, and or some foundation. I mean, which could theoretically, I mean, more easily add funds and help.
I think these principles are set from the very beginning, very clearly. There are different kinds of memberships in Parallel Polis, and one of them is so-called Board of Donors. This is the highest way of membership, or not highest, but the most generous, I would say. And these people pay quite significant amount per month. I think it's like 700 euros, 600 euros, something like this per month. But the point is that nobody can pay more. They have like strictly done set up the fee, the membership fee they pay. So which should protect the organization from one general partner who will donate us lots of money 1 year. So the organization starts to operate with different budget, and another year he can say, if you don't do this thing that I like, I will stop my funding, which can be fatal for the organization. So that's the principle how we reach the money of, let's say, more wealthy people. But of course, it's living organism and things can change in future. I don't exclude it.
Yeah, sorry, there's another question, so we can get back to you if there are not any others.
So at this moment, would you say that Parallel New Polish community has more of a physical presence or online presence, if you should compare it?
It definitely was more about physical presence, and I think that during the last year it takes serious, important lesson that being dependent on the physical presence only is not the good way. So I think now this Congress is exactly good example how the things evolve, and I can't imagine that it would come back to physical premises only presence. I think the online would be more and more important, of course.
Any other questions?
Just to add on the idea I mentioned before about the billionaires, because I think that there are many people, some people or many people in the crypto space which made a lot of money with rising crypto prices. Some didn't. I mean, some even had losses because of unfortunate things like MT-Gox and etc. But I recently saw some article also that the number of Bitcoin billionaires or multimillionaires is like again rising very much, and so maybe we have through networking we can reach to such people, and maybe if for one time because of Corona also. You could set a clear rule like, okay, this time we will accept larger donations, but with absolutely no interference, of course, in the operations. Because I think that at least a part of these very rich people now, if we made them become very aware that they only did get this money because of Satoshi and all the others who contributed, then I think this is such a great place, and such many great things come out of here, so that
it's very nice to hear. Of course, donations are always nice. But what is much more valuable and sustainable is when the organization is able to create the fundings itself. So I think this should be still the main focus: how to be totally independent on donations, and then donations can be the nice to have add-on, or some network that protects you from total fall. In case of some critical situations, then some donator who helps not to fall to the ground can be, of course, important. And in other parallel policies in history, of course, it was very, very important as well. The frequently quoted Soros, this big donor, one of the biggest in the world, also supported Charter 77 in the 70s and 80s. So yeah, we can see lots of parallels with history as well. But not parallel policy. He didn't fund parallel policy, as far as I know. There is one more question.
Okay, last question.
Appreciate.
This year, there's the online version and the physical version, and also in previous years, I'm sure you recorded a lot of the content. So now it's it's not just like a physical thing, because it's people are experiencing in real time anywhere. And we just spoke about like a sustainable way of surviving, like in a material sense. What's your plan or vision for this content or the stuff that's being generated? Like does that relate in some way to sustainable way of, like, for example, you could have like a library of content that you pay to access, or like there's this now that you have the valuable stuff in this form, and you're open to opening it to the world. You don't have to be here. Like how do these two relate, or do they relate in your vision?
I'm not the person in charge for this, because I am since May. I'm not member of the leadership of this organization, so it's not in my hands anymore. But as far as I know, the Slovak model will be followed. So Slovak Parallel Polis create a paid zone for courses and lectures and so on that happened in Parallel Polis physically. So you cannot access all the content for free, but there is some paid zone, and I think this makes sense because it worked pretty well in Slovakia. So I think this should be followed as well, and the user experience with the hop-in with the tool for this congress is quite nice. I'm positively surprised how nice it works. So I think that's exactly the way how to do stuff. Yeah.